Should we start off just by saying, could you introduce yourself and what you currently do before we go back into the depths of time and explore your past?
Sure. So my name is Katherine de León. I am a Vice President and Group General Manager at EA. So I work in mobile and predominantly in the strategy genre.
Exactly. So it's probably worth going back to, one of the earliest roles I know you had. If you think about virtual worlds, which is obviously a big thing right now.
Yeah, I say to people, I worked on VR before VR was cool.
Exactly. Let's particularly, Linden Labs. Let's think about that as a sort of way to kick us off in, because I think it sort of sets a tone. You're at Linden Labs, and
That was my first job out of grad school.
Was it really?
Yeah, so Linden Lab made Second Life. I don't know if you guys saw Philip. I think he was here yesterday. So I joined that company as an intern and a community manager coming out of graduate school. And I completely fell in love with all of the emergent behavior that I was seeing in the user base. And Second Life was going through this exponential growth cycle at the time. So it was also a very interesting place to be. And the economy was fascinating.
Yeah.
So that experience, I've worked in free-to-play and free services for my entire career, I think in part because of how much intellectual density there was in that problem.
And I think that's an interesting thing, because I think, what's fascinating for me is that you didn't have the baggage that maybe some of us had in terms of, because even though I got involved in free-to-play very, very early, and most of the stuff I've done has been online since like 98. Yeah, seriously, online since 98. Dial-up modems just don't even take me back. I still have nightmares. There are a lot of people who still have this baggage about what is a good game, and a good game should be a paid game, and all this kind of stuff. And you didn't have any of that baggage, did you?
No, I think, so I don't know how you guys feel about being a game maker, but for me, I became a game maker to sort of help people feel. And there aren't a lot of prescriptions around that, importantly, I think.
No, I think that's a key thing, isn't it? Because we're looking at, again, the reason why I think this is an important thing to talk about is, I think your journey through that process is really indicative of kind of what we all need to do in terms of looking at, we might be dealing with high quality, big content right now, but actually a lot of it comes to stuff that was actually challenging what a game could be. Arguably. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think increasingly we're seeing more openness around thinking of our business as a business of play instead of sort of a more prescriptive idea of what a game is. Because, people do have very distinct ideas about what the requirements are for a game. But I also think there's a lot of open-mindedness that we're seeing around play patterns and generally thinking more about interactivity in a broader way, and a lot of incredibly talented people and brilliant minds applied to the problem of play versus the problem of games. We have talent all across the industry, obviously, but the job of being a game maker in some ways is becoming increasingly complex as the world wires up, and we focus more on creating human connections instead of solitary ones. There's still absolutely a role to be played for single-player games in our business, but the dynamics of platforms are changing.
No, absolutely. And so, what point did you transition to that from the community role into that sort of more production role, which is where I got?
Right. Well, I went to Sony. Yeah. So after Linden Lab, Oscar and I worked together at PlayStation, and we tried to do free-to-play on the PlayStation 3.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. This is 2008. People forget, I think, how early this was. And we got lambasted.
When did you get there?
I was 2008 when I joined.
Yeah, so that was like before Zynga was exploding on Facebook. Yeah. It was really early.
Yeah. But I do remember,
or it was as Zynga was exploding on Facebook.
Yeah. 2007 was when I first got people like Christian Segazari and Playfish and all that kind of stuff. And I remember because Christian's a old friend of mine, and he came out of an event that Facebook announced that they were going to do games, and he was so excited. And then I think a year later, I was in PlayStation working with you, and we were trying to think, okay, how are we going to make that work for us on console? Yeah. And even the things like, we didn't have billing systems that would allow you to bill properly. We had to design them. So a lot of the, a lot of the conversations we had were trying to convince the wider company that this was a model that could actually work.
So I was told that actually PlayStation Home was the beginning of the indie games program at PlayStation.
Oh, really?
That's what I was.
Okay.
So
that's good.
This is the rumor that I heard because we had a real problem where AAA game developers didn't want to make content for PlayStation Home. And because they were really busy making their AAA games. And so we had this idea that we were going to go out and talk to indies because, we had captured an audience on PlayStation 3. We had 17 million people on the platform, I think, at the time.
Something like that,
And we needed to deliver a play experience to them.
And the thing I remember is the first opening week, we had like 68,000 concurrent users or something, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's concurrent simultaneous to the second.
On a console.
On a console.
Yeah.
Unheard of. At the same time, we were being lambasted for being a failure, which is hilarious and terrifying and horrible. But it was also brilliant, because I think we had a point where we had like 3 million monthly active users.
Yeah, well, there were two things. Like, first of all, AAA titles, $60, right? People were buying one or two of those games a year. But they still wanted to engage with they still wanted to engage in games as much as they could, and so we gave them a free path for doing that, but we didn't have enough content. No. So we signed up all these indies. We were the first ones to send test kits instead of those big dev kits. They were like $300 instead of $10,000.
So I don't know how many of you got involved in PlayStation 3 development, but you used to have the dev kits were like £10,000 or dollars. 10,000
pounds. They weighed 10,000 pounds and cost $10,000.
Something like that. And we were the first team to basically say, no, you don't need that, you just need a test kit.
Yeah.
And also, but the key thing, and this is the reason why I want to focus on it from a production point of view, is that you've now got a situation where you're dealing with not just us making sure we get the great tools that the teams need, although to be honest the tools were problematic, which we'll talk about another time, but we also had to get games coming in, and we had to get games coming in which passed a certain level of quality in order to not be detrimental to the platform.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think is really interesting, is how did you start? Because you guys in the States were really good at this, and the European team were a little bit undermanned, and the Japanese team were a little bit esoteric, should we say.
Yeah.
How did you guys kind of kick that program off?
So I think quality, people define quality in different ways. And I think part of the journey with PlayStation Home was figuring out what quality meant to our players. Because in every platform, it's slightly different, right? And we see this in mobile today. What quality means on a Samsung, on an S4 is very different than what it means on an iPhone 10. And so there are some ways in which I think, really trying to figure out what the audience needed and wanted from us that was a very formative experience for me. And that was kind of the first time I had ever really thought about that in a significant way. And I over the course of my career, experimented a lot with how do you get to market quickly? What does quality mean for your user base? What does it mean for you as a game maker? Like, it's been an evolving process for me, and I'm sure it'll continue to evolve.
Yeah, no, and I think actually one thing that's worth pointing out is if you think about the earliest days, when we first launched, the most fun you could have was rubbing your avatar against a wall in order to pop up in midair.
Or dancing.
That was literally the only thing you could realistically do.
Yeah.
And because we didn't have any budget set up at the beginning to get content, we had a little bit, and then we had basically months to get content live.
We had to deal with a lot of constraints, and so did the developers that were developing on our platform. And I think in some ways, indies were sort of the perfect path forward for us as a business, because indies were not intimidated or, they weren't upset about constraints.
Yeah.
They were used to constraints, and they were used to being creative within the context of those constraints. And so there were ways in which it was kind of like a perfect fit for us, because, where some people wouldn't necessarily necessarily see the playfulness and just dancing or rubbing up against a wall. You know, there was like a little bit more open-mindedness around how that sort of behavior could be leveraged for a broader and deeper experience for the players.
And I think at that point, I think it's really important, which is because we were selling outfits and pets, and we were also creating games, and there's obviously different constraints. And I do remember particularly, one thing I often talk about is the gold suit.
Yeah. Chris Mahoney's gold suit.
Yeah,
that was his
Chris-
baby,
our
yeah.
friend Chris-
And it was like animated, so it had like money cascading out of the pockets. And
So how did that happen? I mean,
that was a big seller.
Yeah.
It was an experiment.
Yeah.
Like much of the success that probably anyone has had in this business. So many of the things that we did that were successful were just guesses. Yeah. We just whiffed, in part because at that time, and particularly in the console space, there wasn't a lot of data about who our players were. We didn't have a lot of behavioral data. We weren't doing a lot of analysis. I think, like, in many ways, Zynga really pioneered that model on Facebook, and the industry was a little bit slow to adopt, and now we're all on the data train.
This is the fight you and I both had to face, which is,
Yeah.
you know, we were in a situation we're trying to convince Sony that actually, you know, the whole of the studio teams, they didn't get that we needed data to manage this service, and we actually had to do some kind of, you know, real hard fighting and basically back channeling in order to get any data at all.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that's solved now in this industry, but I think it's hard for people to understand that it was even a time when you didn't need data, or thought you didn't need data.
I mean, vision-led development is extremely important. You can't build something that resonates with people without vision. Like, that's a hard requirement. But, you know, data just helps us adapt, helps us create experiences that are going to resonate. It's sort of like a good building block for the creative side of the business. So yeah, we did a lot of experimentation, and then we just had to see, like, what are people actually, you know, throw this stuff out there and see what people make of it.
So day to day as a producer in that role, how were you handling this different types of content and the different flow of content and different types of organizations who you had no authority over? And in fact, you had to keep them motivated to be able to deliver new content.
So, I mean, a lot of it was relationship building and asking for help. At the time, PlayStation Home was a strategic initiative for the company, and people wanted to help, but that, you know, asking somebody else to do the work of figuring out how to do that is, it's not very respectful of their time. And so I talked to as many smart people in the company as I could, and where I thought they could bring value, I asked for help, and people were really, they were very open to it. They wanted to support us. We were in kind of an entrepreneurial business unit in the PlayStation Network, which had been newly formed under Susan Panico. And so, you know, I think it was just a question of how do we rally the organization around a common mission and vision for the platform.
So after Sony, you ended up doing, and I think this is kind of useful.
I quit
You
the
quit,
games
I know.
industry.
You literally quit. So, yeah, I'm glad you said that to me.
Yeah, I quit.
It was so much. I mean, we had a hard time, and we didn't really get kind of the. I mean, I think it's worth noting that, you know, PlayStation Home probably had like 3 million monthly active users, with 3% of them spending around $11 a month, which in the mobile scheme of things doesn't sound very much, but for console was enormous. And at the same time, we were constantly being told all the things we had originally been promised, not by us, but by the senior management, which we couldn't deliver, and just because actually some of it was physically impossible. So it was quite a stressful experience in some ways because we didn't really get the kind of the kudos I think that we probably
it was hard work.
deserved.
It was hard.
So you've left, you've gone to, and you're doing video. But the reason I think it's interesting is because
Well, I started a machine learning company is what it wound up being, right? So we were doing machine learning for streaming video, and so it was sort of like Pandora for music videos, and we were syndicating those music videos from YouTube and Vimeo. So it was actually a really difficult problem because nobody was doing machine learning on the long tail of syndicated content. So we did that for 15 months and had a small acquisition, which was really nice. And then I went right back to games because I guess I missed games throughout that time. It was a really great learning experience for me to be an entrepreneur, to live on, two of us on like $40,000 in the Bay Area for 15 months with 2 employees. It was, that was kind of wild.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, that was a rush, but yeah.
But what did that process bring to you when you're now an executive producer at Zynga?
So, I mean, I've been using machine learning ever since that experience, and I've been a big advocate of using data science in games. I think there are many different ways to do that, but that was, that was a great experience, and I went into the social casino space after that. In fact, one of my former coworkers, I think, is here now. Hi, Devin. And I was in social casino, and social casino was sort of exploding on mobile at the time, so that was the first job I had in mobile. Yeah. And that was a fascinating time to be in that business, to see the rise of mobile, to launch GSN Casino on mobile, and to manage a big portfolio of games.
What was the day-to-day work in that context, and how does that relate back to your time, doing that kind of day-to-day, cold-face work as a producer?
So I came into that business as a producer, and I think what they needed early on was a little bit more of a strategic view on the portfolio. So like, what kind of games are we going to make, and how are we going to make them, and how are we going to deliver them quickly to a very hungry audience that's growing? So we kind of, we were working in a lot of different areas of games, and we refocused the portfolio on social casino, and we had a small team. So it was a lot of rolled up sleeves and, working with people every day to figure out what they were passionate about and trying to connect them with the needs of our audience. And we grew that business. And as the business grew, I still worked a lot every single day with the art team, the engineering team, the producers. We had an amazing group of people working on games for that.
But it sounds like that's almost like a entrepreneurial unit within a wider company.
Yeah.
It sounds almost like a startup in its own right.
It felt a little bit like one. In fact, the original team at so GSN was actually it was an acquisition of a group of entrepreneurs who started a company called Mesmo on Facebook, and they were acquired by GSN, and so the original founding entrepreneurial team was still there, and it still ran very much like a startup, and I think we had maybe like 40 people in the office at the time when I joined, and really big plans for the future. And so that job was, about some very early strategy and then a lot of execution for a long time. And it was, it was great. That was actually a really good mix of like rolling up sleeves and then also doing some of the more, the foundational work that's sort of the higher level work that's required to grow a business in that life cycle. So
I think that's kind of the interesting pivot for me, which is you're focusing on delivery of content and experiences, but then as time goes on and your career has progressed, you become more and more focused on the kind of strategic decisions that then are affecting that. And obviously, we're now moving into the point where you're getting becoming a general manager, and you're involved with things like CSR2 and Dawn of Time.
At Zynga,
exactly.
Yeah.
And how does that change your mindset as you're now more and more responsible for the bottom line? Obviously, much bigger teams.
So I think I went from GSN to a small startup, one of Will Wright's startups, and that was kind of a short-lived thing. And then I went from there to Zynga. And I joined Zynga at kind of an interesting time because they had just launched Empires and Allies. It was their first foray into action strategy on mobile. And that was a little bit of a turnaround because when you launch a mobile game, you owe it to the people who are playing that game to update content and to iterate on the game and to make it great for them, because mobile launches are messy. I think all launches of live games, and particularly social games, are messy. And so we had kind of like missed on that transition to live, and so that was a turnaround, to be sure, and that was a lot of execution. And also just simple things like, can we set a roadmap for the team to execute against and not change our minds about what is on that roadmap?
Yeah.
And that's actually really hard in dynamic businesses to say, like, this is the roadmap for the year. It's a vision-led, feature-driven roadmap, knowing that you're going to get a lot of data. How do you know, the real challenge there was like, how do we have a roadmap that retains its meaning over the long haul like that? Because teams want to execute, but it takes a while to build great experiences. And
they change, they iterate.
Yes, yeah. And so I think, you know, and at Zynga, that was really the challenge that I faced, was like, how do we set these long-term roadmaps, give continuity to developers, give them the space that they need in order to deliver something they're proud of that will also be meaningful to our players. How do we do that in this very dynamic environment where we're learning about a new genre as a company? The company is in a quarter-over-quarter turnaround. Like, it was a really interesting time. And then after that experience, I was able to sort of, you know, do portfolio management again and take a step back and operate at a little bit of a higher level and think about what the next 5 years looks like instead of the next 5 months, which is really nice and very refreshing. I think, you know, like, to maintain your intellectual agility, it's a good idea to throw yourself in and out of executional and strategic situations, right? Because if you stay too, you know, it's good to be in the weeds.
Oh yeah,
you have to be. Yeah.
And I mean, one of the downsides of being an evangelist for so long has been that, you know, you don't do the day-to-day thing, and so I've had to do these side projects, wanted to do side projects in order to keep my skill set. Otherwise, everything you say is irrelevant. So, I mean, unfortunately, we're running out of time because it's the nature of a 20-minute slot, and there's so much. I mean, I wanted to talk about, you know, why, you know, how being a Marine, you know, in your early career affected
the military.
Yeah, I mean, honestly,
I was a super troubled teenager.
Yeah.
My teenagers. Oh my goodness. I have 2 daughters, so karma on the way. So I was a really troubled teenager. I joined the military to untrouble myself because, haha. And at the time, I remember coming home and I told my mom, I was like, Mom, I've like tortured you for the last some number of years, and I'm really sorry, and I'm going to join the Marine Corps and fix it. And she completely lost her mind, rightfully so. And I was like, don't worry. This was the Clinton years. I was like, don't worry, Mom. We're not going to go to war. And she says to me, Catherine, the United States is always at war. And I don't approve. And you're going to torture me for as long as you're in the military, too, so thanks for that. And anyway, I got lucky. I did not go to war. My platoon deployed like a few weeks after I got out of the military, and that was so. But I learned a lot about discipline. I learned a lot about leadership, basic things that I used as a producer. Like in the military, the most senior person always eats last. And as a producer, in my career, I took that to heart. Your team is on the floor working late. You better be there too.
Yeah.
And you better get them food, and you better eat last. If there's no food left over, you're the one who doesn't eat. So just kind of like the fundamentals of wrangling, you know, herding cats. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And one last thing. Now you've moved into EA really recently.
Yeah.
What's that lesson you're going to take from that career that you think the guys in the room are also going to benefit from?
Support the teams. Be really clear about what your expectations are with the people on your teams, and then do everything you can to help them execute.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.